who are very, very good, the police and the intel service, they're not coming out yet and confirming it's a terrorist attack. But I think in this case, I think you're safe to speculate in that direction. It certainly appears. I mean, given the anniversary, the celebration, I mean, for Bastille Day, the National Day, we know that they focus on key dates, on anniversaries, on holidays to try to maximize the impact. And if it does prove to be a terrorist attack, I think it also points out to something else, which is kind of what we've been saying in the past. These attacks can be dumbed down to very simple resources. And in this case, if it, again, proves to be a terrorist attack, we're talking about a truck. I mean, imagine that. I mean, that was their operational planning at this point, rather than, we tend to think of these things as very sophisticated, a long time in planning. This is a different animal.
Mike, having said that, the Obama administration has said we're winning, we're taking back key cities. This year, I think ISIS has lost 40% of the land that they occupy, and that these attacks, and perhaps even the idea that they didn't have weapons or sophisticated planning but resorted to a truck, are actually evidence that they're on the run. And if we can be patient as a people, they'll ultimately lose. Can we be that patient? Because it doesn't feel like they're losing.
Well, I mean, what will happen is we'll be patient as a people, and they'll keep killing us in different ways, whether they have a territory and a caliphate, or whether it morphs into, a decentralized, series of constant aggressive attacks in the West, which is essentially the game plan we saw with al-Qaeda. We took out a great deal of the al-Qaeda infrastructure. We went into Tora Bora all those years ago in Afghanistan. That was our reason for going in there. And as we had more success in sort of destroying their top-down leadership, we saw it flatten out. We saw, individual cells and groups around the world taking more responsibility. So we've seen this happen before. It shouldn't surprise us. So, yes, the White House is absolutely correct. We are taking back territory, and we are, degrading their revenue streams. We are killing some of their leaders. Frankly, it would be nice if we were doing it faster and if we did it, 3 years ago. But neither here nor there. At this stage, what we have to understand is, this is not them, in their last throes as they lose their territory. This is just a different iteration of what we can expect to face. What we deal with in Islamic extremism is not going away in our lifetimes. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it's just, we have to be pragmatic about this.
Steve Rogers, I think you kind of look at it differently. You would like to see us take a more offensive posture, go in there aggressively with one thing in mind, to destroy ISIS once and for all, even though it would be, the way I envision it, and you can correct me, a sort of messy event. They are, of course, surrounding themselves with Christians and others who aren't, they have human shields. So there would be a lot of collateral damage, a lot of bystanders would die. Is that, in your mind, though, worth the price, worth the public relations imagery of it? Is that worth the price to destroy this scourge once and for all?
It's an ugly price, but we have to stop fighting a politically correct war. And Mike said something very interesting. They hit France on a national day. Charles, I shared with you during the break, the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention will be defining moments in the war on terrorism if they dare strike during that period of time. A defining moment for this country on how we're going to respond, because that will be a direct assault on the electoral process of this country, especially involving the next president of the United States.
Do we have to wait, Mike? I mean, again, why do we keep waiting for more and more defining moments? Some thought it was San Bernardino. Some thought it was Orlando. A year ago, we thought it was Paris. France is still in a national state of emergency. How many more final blows do we need before we sort of take a different tactic here?
Well, I mean, I wish we had gone in a far more aggressive manner, at least a couple of years ago, and we can defeat them on the ground out in Syria and Iraq. That's not an issue. It hasn't been an issue from a military and intelligence perspective if we commit the resources. This White House isn't going to do that. I think we all understand that by now. But I guess my point at that 30,000-foot level is, yes, we need to do that. We need to absolutely destroy them on the ground. But people have to understand that doesn't mean the end of Islamic extremism, the end of ISIS in some fashion. And just as Al-Qaeda morphed and changed and adjusted their planning, this is going to be the same thing. It's all the same problem. So we can destroy that turf, and we need to. We have to. But we have to be realistic and understand these attacks, whether it's in France or whether it's here in the U.S. or anywhere around the world, they're not going away because the hatred, the Islamic extremism that fuels all of this is not something we're going to take care of just by destroying them in Syria and Iraq. So and again, that's not saying we shouldn't be doing that, because we should.
But you're not saying best case scenarios we have to live with these events indefinitely for an indefinite period of time?
I'm saying it's not going away in our lifetime. You and me are going to be talking about this, 20 years from now. This is not something, when we talk about trying to find a solution, yeah, of course we have to try. You have to do all those things. You have to, community policing and hitting them hard on the ground and all the hard work that's being done right now, and that continues to be done. We have to do all that. But I guess what I'm saying is I think we need to be more honest with people about what we're facing, and it's not something that we're going to solve in one happy day. We wake up and we look and go, you know what? We stopped it. Islamic extremists no longer hate us.
I do want to alert the audience that we do have additional breaking news. Sky News, in fact, saying the truck driver has been killed, but a possible accomplice could be on the run at this very moment. Of course, we will continue to keep you updated on that as well. And Steve, I guess that's this is going to be an election issue. Obviously, it already is. But, the way you fight them, because there are a lot of people who believe if you can get rid of the notion that they're a caliphate, that they have some sort of tentacles all over the world by cutting off its head, presumably in Raqqa and other places as well, that would diminish significantly the threat, particularly of homegrown versions that go on the internet and admire this kind of stuff. They won't have anyone to look up to anymore.
Well, exactly. And Mike's right. It's like crime. Crime is never going to go away, but we could diminish their abilities and capability of striking us as violently as they have. And that'll be, as he says, community policing, increasing our intelligence resources, and that's how you're going to engage the enemy. You're going to have to get the entire American public involved, from the people in the neighborhood to the White House. That's how we diminish them.
Well, we also know that there are going to be some calls for a cracking down on even more crackdowns, if we can, or how, with the radical Islamic jihadism. We'll hear more calls, Steve, in this country for monitoring mosques, and we'll hear more calls for the technology community, the tech community, and social media community to step it up as well. Do we start to talk about removing embedded civil liberties because we're at war?
We talk about being smart because we are at war. And when you're at war, the rules of engagement change. Look, it's going to be a choice. It's either going to be to see the destruction of America, or America get strong and get mighty and address this once and for all. Yes, some civil liberties are going to have to be moved a little bit. And we're talking about surveillance. Look, I've always said you could check my phone, check my computers, do what you want to do. I want my country to survive so my kids and my grandkids could live here like I did.
Joining us in the studio now, my colleague Deirdre Bolton, who has spent time in this area, knows it very well, and Shelby Holliday, top reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Deirdre, what can you tell us?
Well, it's just sad, right? It breaks all of our collective hearts. I mean, in every seaside city in the south of France, you have these sort of big avenues, right? So this is Promenade des Anglais. So if you were there, you would be there. This is where you'd be. I mean, there's high-end hotels, there's restaurants. And so for July 14th, it's really like our July 4th. But I think in the U.S., like, our Independence Day is much more personal, right? Maybe you go see fireworks, but for the most part, you're with family, you're with friends, you're usually in somebody's backyard. Whereas on Bastille Day, for the 14th, you're out. Like, people are out in the streets. So unfortunately, this provided a really easy target. I mean, there's a lot more people just, they go out, they sit on the terrace, or for young people, maybe there's even a DJ at one part. But the idea is to be out in the streets together. So unfortunately, in this case, that created an even softer target.
Shelby, before I go to you, I want to alert the audience that we're hearing reports from the Daily Mail. They, in turn, source witnesses or eyewitnesses who say now there's a hostage situation at a local hotel, perhaps the accomplice who escaped. That could be this. And we're all obviously digging deeper and deeper into this as well. Mike Baker, if this does morph into a hostage situation, We're learning that the old school tactics of waiting them out, negotiations, that does not work. Do you think we'll maybe see if, again, this is all pure speculation, but if indeed it is a hostage situation already as a result of 30 people or more being killed, how do you think they'll proceed from here?
Well, yeah, it's horses for courses when you're talking about this, because I think we've learned with this particular enemy, again, we're a little bit, out front, but if it is an ISIS-related attack or an Islamic extremist attack, we know this beast, and so they'll hit it hard. They won't step back and, try to do what some would call old school and establish a relationship, keep the lines of communication, open with the hostage takers. They'll, as soon as they can, they'll go in. There's some planning involved in that. It's not, I don't want to make it sound simple. It's a very heavy lift, but they'll hit it very hard.
But there's a sense of urgency to hit it hard and hit it fast.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just am seeing that Facebook has just activated its safety check-in. So for family and friends, and Charles, you're talking about this possibility of a hostage situation developing. There are words, and I'm just reading some things off a local feed, but it seems like the Meridian Hotel is a possible location for this.
A well-known upper-end upscale hotel there. Shelby, you've covered this terrorism thing from the very beginning. Now, some early speculation is that this is a reprisal because ISIS yesterday finally confirmed that Abu Omar al-Shahini, who's a Georgian Chechnyan commander, very, very well liked within that organization, well-known, distinctive with his reddish beard. They confirmed that he was killed. And this is retaliation for that.
Yeah, there are a few things about this accident. We could call it an accident now, maybe an attack. We'll learn more in the coming hours. But there are a few things about this attack.
The police chief has already called it an attack. Yeah.
There are a few things about this attack that absolutely look like ISIS. It's on a national holiday. It's in a Western vacation town. This is the kind of soft target you see ISIS go after all the time. And the fact that if it is retaliatory, that is a big deal. That's a huge thing for ISIS. They tend to go seek revenge on anyone who takes out their people. Another thing that, here in the West, we're not used to seeing these truck accidents as an attack, but that happens a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. They use these Franken trucks to run into troops, to run into Westerners that they want to kill. So it's not guns blazing, something we're used to seeing, but it is a method that ISIS uses and other terrorist groups use to attack Westerners.
But guys, I have to, I hate to have to say this, but now there are reports from credible sources that 60 are dead. The death toll last year in the Paris attack was almost 150. Remember, over 100 were injured. Thousands were fleeing. Thousands were there. A promenade designed for a massive pedestrian gathering. So,
yeah, I mean, this is really where you would be as a tourist. I mean, if you were there and you're visiting, this is where you would be. And I mean, the kind of, as Shelby mentioned, some contextual points, but the French president was saying, I think 24 hours ago, we're just getting ready to lift the emergency lockdown that our country has been under since November 13th. So obviously that will certainly wait.
And regarding the hotel, let's hope that is an accomplice and there's not a coordinated attack beginning to take place once again in France, because then we've got real serious problems there.
I'm sorry, Mike.
France has serious problems to begin with.
Yeah, they do. They have. I mean, that's that's a sort of a. We're going to watch very closely because however they learn how to handle this, and believe me, public opinion has changed dramatically. We remember, you look at Le Pen, her party that she sort of inherited or took from her father. It's gained a tremendous popularity. They're winning elections recently. We saw in Austria where the similar party almost won, and there were tremendous undercurrents to this with the British exit vote as well.
Exactly.
Charles, I was just going to say, I mentioned Facebook activating the check-in, but I just want to mention law enforcement from these requesting that people specifically not share graphic images because they are out there and not tweet them. And the idea that we've seen around the world is not to glorify an act of violence. So police on the ground, they're asking for that.
And Charles, to your point, people want action. People in the Western world want action. We need leaders to step up. We need the White House to step up and finally declare war on the scourge, and the rest of the Western world to stand with the president and eliminate them once and for all.
Mike
But
Baker?
it's an ideological battle too. I mean, I've interviewed the spokesperson for Operation Inherent Resolve. He says we can't kill our way out of this problem.
Shelby, I agree
with you. You can't cut the head off
blood. There's American
snake.
blood on the streets. There's French blood on the streets. There's Russian blood on the streets.
It's
we need
military,
to shed their blood and teach them a lesson. That's how you fight war.
Military is part of the answer. But there's an ideological war.
How do you win the ideological war?
That we are not winning right now.
How do you win the ideological war? Does it help to destroy, to cut the head off, to degrade the enemy, to get rid of this sort of fantasy of a caliphate? Wouldn't that help?
Long-term people say it helps, but in the meantime, ISIS has lost 50% of its territory. While we attack them, while we go after their home base, they do this. They spread out and they try to attack as many soft Western targets as they can.
Mike Baker, I want to bring you back in because I know you've been trying to jump in here.
No, there's so many ways that we need to go on this subject, but anybody who spent any time, operationally fighting terrorism, look, we tend to simplify these things down, and we dumb them down into easy to digest, pieces. But everybody who's been involved in this fight understands. Of course, it takes place on multiple levels, But so yes, of course, there's a military component to this. There's absolutely and there's a variety of other components that have to be done at the same time. And you know what? They're being done at the same time. It's not as if we're attacking them on the ground in Syria and Iraq and degrading territory and revenue streams and all that and not doing anything else. We're also taking the fight to them elsewhere, as we have been doing for years. I mean, look, this is not, and I guess I keep beating the same dead horse, but they killed 200 of our Marines in 1983. Do we think that's somehow a different element than what we're facing now? It's not. It's the same problem. And we've never been able to really get our heads around the idea that because a group surfaces, it doesn't mean it's a different fight. This is the same fight we've been engaged in for a very long time. And so
I guess so, Mike. I guess, Mike, the less sophisticated of those who are watching us on their televisions right now wonder, we've been in a fight, but have we ever tried to win this fight?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know what? We would have lost a lot more lives if we haven't had the success we've had over the years. And the honest to God's truth is, just as if the same way this is not going away in our lifetime, we're not going to stop everything. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. We talk about, we can't kill our way out of it. You know what? Doesn't mean we shouldn't be making a good faith effort, while at the same time doing all the other things that we need to be doing and are doing. But this is a beast that we need to have a better understanding of its I don't want to say its permanency, but this is something that it's not new, but we always tend to look at it every time there's an attack, and we try to talk about it as if it's some new issue.
Right. Hold on one second, Mike. Go ahead.
Mike, do you mind? It's Deirdre Bolton. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, there's some people, and again, I'm following local bloggers who are saying, why is this happening now on Bastille Day? Of course, their equivalent more or less of July 4th, when all the Euro soccer matches just took place there and went unharmed. Is this idea to make a statement on the country's version of its own Independence Day? Was the security ready for any kind of threat in these football stadiums, in these soccer stadiums, but just not ready on a very soft target?
Well, you've kind of answered that question. It's a very soft target in the sense that, a football game, in a way, it's still an attractive target, but it's more contained. And it's in a way, you have a different game plan for securing that site and that event. Look, the French police and military and the intel service is very, very, very good, and unfortunately, just like the rest of us, have a lot of experience now in dealing with this problem. So it's not as if after Euro they stepped away and said, well, everybody stand down, take 2 days off on the security side, we'll be good. It's just that the enemy does their work. They do their recce's. They get out there and they do their surveillance. They identify a list of targets, and then they walk themselves through. As they do the surveillance on each site, they try to figure out which is the most attractive, which is the softest. And they have I don't want to make them sound like Lex Luthor, but there's a methodology. And again, kind of going back to my last point, that methodology hasn't really changed over the years in terms of identifying a target.
Shelby?
I think there will be a lot of important questions we'll have answered in the coming hours, coming days. Where are these people from, assuming they're men? Where are these guys from? How did they get into France? Were they in Syria? Were they training with ISIS? Are they members of ISIS? Those things will shed a big light on what actually unfolded. But I'm also curious what's in the truck. This truck could have been packed with explosives and meant to kill a lot more people. And from what I've been reading online, it it was a driver who drove in to kill and continued to drive until it hit as many bodies as possible.
And Shelby brings up very good and valid points, because the question is, who is he or she, whoever that is connected to? There had to be more than one person involved in the reconnaissance of this, in the planning of the operation, and finally, who gave the execute order.
I want to go to Liz Peek now. Liz, these attacks have already had a major impact on the Western world, and particularly America. But it seems like because they happen with such greater frequency these days, that we're going to even have to do more and make some real tough decisions here, some decisions that may even go against the grain of what we consider ourselves as civilized people to somehow mitigate or eradicate this problem once and for all. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, clearly that has been already an issue in this campaign. Donald Trump's talk about limiting the number of people coming in from war-torn areas in the Middle East, limiting Muslims coming into the country has been very controversial. But you do begin to wonder, when these attacks continue, whether there isn't going to be a greater hearing given ideas like that. But I have to tell you, I was in Paris 2 weeks ago, and I was surprised that the presence of police was pretty modest. I mean, I went over there expecting there to be sort of an armed camp, you know, guards all over the place. I went to the American ambassador's residence. There wasn't any particular militarization of that place. We were sort of in a number of interesting public places, and Paris was kind of like it always was. I mean, I guess I expected more. And by the way, I didn't think that the airlines flying to Paris were particularly vigilant about checking people getting on the plane. 5 or 6 years ago, it was much tougher. You had 1, 2, or 3 even sort of random checkpoints on the way to a plane headed to Paris, particularly if it was American Airlines, which I flew. And this time, you know, it was like flying to, I don't know, Maryland or something. I mean, it was really no big deal. So, I know that the French have been trying to up their anti-terrorism presence, but I have to tell you, it was not very evident.
Do you think some of that's politically motivated? You know, France has had this open arms sort of approach with this group of people for a very long period of time. Do you think it was one of these politically correct moves, and that may have backfired on them?
Well, in terms of standing down, you mean? On
the lack of, you know, the lack of not necessarily apathy or indifference, but just sort of to your point, the lack of military, the lack of surveillance. You know, the bottom line, I think one of the things we learn in security is that any target can be taken down. The key is to make it look, you know, unappealing.
Well, and the key really is intervening earlier on. And I think your word surveillance is something that we're going to start talking a lot more about in this country, because, as you know, we had programs up and running in New York, for example, where we are, with people in the mosques, you know, attending services in the mosques, et cetera, trying to unearth problems. And I spent a day embedded with the intelligence department of the New York Police Department, and I met some of those people, and there was, at the time, a lot of chatter about how it had never unearthed anything. Well, I met a fellow who was embedded in the Muslim community, and in fact had to come out because he had unearthed a plot to bomb a church, I think it was. I can't remember the target. But, you know, look, we have to be vigilant. We have to be listening all over the country. And I don't think that's an anti-Muslim approach. I would think that Muslims would welcome people helping them monitor what's going on in their communities.
Right.
France, in some ways, though, I think we should note, has actually been stronger in infringing on people's quote-unquote civil liberties. I mean, listen, after the November 13th attack, I mean, President Hollande went on TV and said, we're at war. We're going to come into your home for any reason, at any time. We don't need a warrant. Well,
that's the state of emergency, but do you know if they followed through with that?
Well, it is actually still on. In fact, you know, oddly enough, and unfortunately for the country, they were just about to lift it. He's now actually in a meeting, an emergency meeting, not surprisingly, at the Interior Ministry, trying to figure out the next steps. I'm also seeing, for what it's worth, that the reports of hostages, there are not as many, meaning that some people are saying that that was a misnomer, but that the driver of this truck was seen by more than a few local people emerging and shooting.
So maybe there aren't hostages, you're saying? Or
That's what I'm reading from blogs, and I just want to be
remember,
specific.
there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information floating through the social media and a lot of media outlets out there. Also on social media, I think Donald Trump has put out a tweet.
He put out a tweet. It's very similar to what he usually tweets when we see these kind of attacks and don't know all of the information yet. He said, another horrific attack, this time in Nice, France. Many dead and injured. When will we learn? It is only getting worse.
You know, Steve, I know you're a Donald Trump surrogate, and we'll see what happens. It has all the markings of Islamic terrorism, the sort of radical terrorism that we've unfortunately become accustomed to. And we've seen a couple of ISIS Twitter sites that have shown photos of it. Now, Mike Baker brings up a great point. They occasionally try to, take any of these things and take credit for it. But even if it's not terrorism, the notion that our world has changed with soft targets, whether it's a nightclub or people on a promenade, on the sidewalks celebrating, our lives are changing dramatically how we live our everyday life.
Yes,
you're a police officer. You're an ex-police officer.
Yes, Charles, they have. And to me, any attack with this large-scale amount of deaths is a terrorist attack, no matter which way the politically correct want to define it. But Donald Trump has asked a question that we're all asking. When? When is enough enough? And policing has changed. I remember the old Mayberry days. We were able to go up to individuals, speak with them, and have a good exchange, good conversation with them. Now cops fear going up to people because of what we're seeing. We saw it in Dallas the other day. But the point is this, and to Deidre's point, I don't think we're at the point now where warrantless searches are necessary, but we need to increase our surveillance capabilities. We need to let the American people know that we're at war. And Deidre, that's the point. The President of the United States doesn't want to come to grips that we're at war. Once he says we're at war, then the rules of engagement change from the local police department to the military.
Well, to be fair, he just sent more troops to Iraq, so he recognizes we need a presence there. I just saw in my email he's being briefed on this attack now.
And Shelby, he'll have a committee meeting. He'll get on the air and say some politically correct stuff. Look, war is war. It's ugly. It's an ugly thing. We're fighting a war right now in the streets of America. He has to recognize that, call it what it is, and unleash the full weight of the U.S. military in the Mideast and unleash police officers. Our hands as police officers are handcuffed. We can't do the job we need to do.
Steve, I want to ask you an uncomfortable question about money, because we were talking about France, and you asked the right question, Charles. I mean, have they followed up on these emergency measures? They sure have, but it takes so many law enforcement members to follow one suspected agitator on one land, terrorist on the other hand. I mean, it takes something like 23 people at least per suspected person.
That's a really important point. We have 1,000 suspected ISIS sympathizers, ISIS members here in the U.S. To Deidre's point, it takes maybe 24 people to follow one person. France has this problem on steroids.
There's an answer to the question.
There have been 1,800 French who have joined the fight in Syria and Iraq. And those are just the people who went to the battlefield.
Agreed.
There are plenty more who've been radicalized online in France.
There's an answer to that. You've got to get local police engaged. In the cities you do, but we've got millions of police officers across this country. Get them engaged in the war on terrorism. Teach them counterterrorism surveillance. Teach them the gathering and collection of intelligence, and that will be a great, great help to the federal authorities.
But Deidre's right. It takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of resources.
You have expertise in this area as well. Connecting. You follow money, you follow terrorism, you follow it all. By the way, I do also want to alert the audience that authorities in Nice are asking everyone right now to stay indoors. And again, we're going to continue to bring you updates as we get them. The ones we get directly from authorities, and if it's intriguing enough and we don't necessarily have corroboration, we'll also share with you things like when we heard that the hotel was that there were hostages there. But I want to go back to you, Liz Peek, on this. In a realistic world, Deirdre brings up this amazing point that we want to throw a lot of resources at these things, and we have these almost all of the homegrown terrorists in our country that have committed these incredibly evil, despicable acts. At one point, we had them in our hands. We knew something was wrong, and we let them go.
Well, look, yes, we've had situations where we have ceased surveillance of somebody. The bombers in Boston come to mind, obviously the shooter in Orlando, and then all of a sudden something happens. But I want to kind of go just a little farther afield, Charles, because one of the things that's going to be talked about now is how this may impact the evolving situation in the EU. Remember, Brexit was partly about immigration. It was partly about the Brits deciding that they didn't want to allow a lot of people into their country who they thought might be dangerous. I think this is going to inflame the situation in France, certainly, where Marine Le Pen is continuing to be an increasingly realistic possibility as someone who might become president after Hollande, who is desperately unpopular. It's also going to be an issue in some of the other countries where they're looking at their EU ties. This is the overarching issue confronting the EU, and every time there's a terrorist attack, it really weakens the bonds of that union. Obviously, bonds which have been seriously frayed by the Brexit vote, but that's not the only vote coming up. Other countries are looking at this, and I think this is going to be a real problem for the common market.
Though, I felt like some of the immigration, and not to sort of miss the contextual point of the video that we're watching, was more about workers. That is to say, workers coming in from Poland to compete with English people for plumbing jobs and carpentry jobs.
Partly.
I'm not trying to be glib about it, but it didn't seem, at least in the UK, I'm sure people have strong feelings about accepting or not accepting refugees, but it seemed more of an economic issue. Who's going to take my job? Is it going to be a carpenter from Poland?
It certainly was having to do with that, but the issue is controlling borders. And I think, as we've seen also, by the way, that issue of jobs and workers got even more complicated when the EU reached some sort of agreement with Turkey, which made people in England and elsewhere in the common market very worried about an influx of Turkish workers, because that's been the issue between Turkey and the EU for decades.
And guys, not to digress too much, but to your point, Deirdre, in 2004, the EU expanded, brought in 10 countries. Most of them are these former Russian satellites that very high-skilled people who were really happy to come into the UK and work for a whole lot less money. I know you're going to have to run. Do you have some final thoughts on this?
Some final thoughts. I mean mostly just the collective emotion that is honestly just very sad. Having spent a lot of my life, honestly, in that part of the world, I feel for the people. They're out. I feel like it would be like us getting together on 4th of July and getting run over. So just on a very basic human level, just sad. On a bigger level, I am interested in hearing what politicians and lawmakers are going to say about spending to support whether it's our troops overseas or our police here. But it feels like we need to step it up.
We definitely have to make a change in the way we're fighting this. And again, I know President Obama is going to come out, to your point, Steve. He's going to make a speech. It's going to fall on deaf ears because you can't keep saying we're winning when these images come up almost now on a weekly basis.
Charles, too much American blood, French blood, English blood, blood all over the place as a result of what terrorism is doing to us. It's time we shed their blood. Let's end it, and let's end it quickly, because we're not going to have a country left if we allow this to continue to go on.
It'll be interesting to see what the EU does about this, too. I mean, there were some massive problems exposed after that attack in Paris. Are they really securing their borders? Has their intelligence really stepped it up? Are they really preventing people coming back from the battlefield, back into their country? How much progress has the European Union and France actually made?
Well, both Presidents Hollande and President Obama are being briefed. We'll hear from both of them shortly. Mike Baker, the movement of migrants, particularly once they become citizens of these countries, is a major issue. To what degree it played in the British exit vote remains to be seen. But we do know it's a major issue. We haven't brought up Germany yet, which is the epicenter of all of this, and Angela Merkel. So your thoughts there, Mike, because she did it. Well, let me ask you, Liz, because she admitted earlier this week, almost shockingly, that ISIS has been embedded among some of the more recent refugees and that they are in her country. Yeah,
we've heard that before. Actually, even going back as late as early as last fall, there were rumors about that, and then actual verification that ISIS had done that, which of course spurred again Donald Trump to make to continue that line that we should be very cautious about letting anyone in this country from Syria, because it was pretty obvious that that was a plan of attack, that they would infiltrate the stream of refugees. Look, Angela Merkel is really on thin ice here, and yes, the immigrant issue in England was largely about wages and so forth, but there is this sense in England that they are not not able to monitor and control who comes into their country. And by the way, Theresa May, who's just become prime minister, was sort of on the hook for not controlling the numbers. She had vowed to do that, and she failed to do it. So now there's going to really be a press, at least in England, but I think across the EU, to be much tougher on allowing people into their countries. Germany, I don't know how you backtrack now. They have, hundreds of thousands of refugees. It's causing all kinds of civil issues in little towns where all of a sudden they have thousands of Muslims living among them and living a very different lifestyle. Frankly, she should have been a little bit more cautious about this in the beginning. My guess is she does not survive her re-election vote.
Well, we also know a lot of the Scandinavian countries, which also at one point had very open-armed ideas about this. But, there's also the element that Europe has this seriously low birth rate, an aging population, and people have to wonder, how did this happen in the first place? They needed people to come in. From an economic perspective, Liz, you know this. You need replacement workers. Right. You need people to come in. Japan, same boat. I don't know what the hell is going to happen with Japan. They're going to go from 120 million people to 80 million people, and they're going to have to reach out to countries around them that they've always looked at and belittled and say, hey, come over here. So it's a lot more complex, or at least it has been, than I think that's been talked about enough in the media.
And Charles, isn't it also about assimilation? When you come to the United States, when you go to any country, you should assimilate and respect that country's laws. We shouldn't be conforming to anyone else's way of living or culture, because we are a nation of many cultures. But the bottom line is, we pledge to the allegiance of the United States. Period. We're all Americans, but our devotion and loyalty should be to the American government.
Shelby.
I just want to point out, not to change subjects entirely, but Site Intelligence is a group that tracks ISIS and really hones in on what's going on in social media. Apparently, ISIS sympathizers are celebrating this attack online, sharing graphic photos. We talked earlier about how people are being asked not to share graphic photos. And an ISIS spokesperson, Adnani, had actually advocated for lone wolves to commit this kind of attack, to drive their car over their victims.
But they have not yet taken that we know of official.
They haven't claimed responsibility
for
but
this.
it is something that has been advocated for and has appeared in those online magazines.
So, Steve, this is obviously, we're going into the Republican convention. Right after that, the Democratic convention. Terrorism is one of these items that floats all the way to the top whenever there's attacks like this with respect to importance to the voters come November. We know where Donald Trump stands. We're not really sure, at least I'm not, where Hillary Clinton stands on this, but I would have to believe she's going to take a more hawkish stance.
Well, I would hope so. Charles, my concern is that next week I will be there. I will be at the Republican National Convention, and I'm sure as we speak, the police executives in Philly and in Cleveland are now talking about this. We have to protect the protesters. Look, we may not like what protesters say and do, but they are exercising their First Amendment rights. If ISIS or any terrorist group is going to try to take down that First Amendment through their actions, we're going to have to respond, and respond decisively before that happens.
Now, apparently, guys, witness account is saying that the truck driver, once the truck came to a stop and crashed, jumped out of the truck and began firing, and of course ultimately exchanging gunfire with police, and he's dead. We think he has an accomplice who is on the run. We're going to continue to keep you updated on that as well.
I also think, back to the politics of this, it will be interesting to see how the American people react to just one more attack. It's heartbreaking to see. It feels like we're experiencing them every week. Whether or not refugees are the problem, here in the U.S., the ISIS-related terrorist attacks we've seen have been committed by Americans who were radicalized here in the U.S. However, a lot of people perceive refugees to be the problem, and this open border policy to be the problem. So I do think this will change American sentiment. Donald Trump has positioned himself to do well in light of these attacks. He gets online, he calls it what it is. He talks about calling it radical Islamic extremism. He looks more positioned to benefit from attacks like this.
Real quick,
that's a horrible thing to say.
Liz, I've only got a few seconds left. Do you want to give us some final thoughts? Because I heard you trying to chime in a minute ago.
No, I would echo that. I think that all these horrible things that are happening, whether it's the Dallas shootings or this further terrorist incident, is very, in a horrible way. It's very positive for Donald Trump's assertion that he is the law and order candidate and the candidate that is working towards security. Look, at the end of the day, it's not all about the economy. It's also all about security. People want to be able to feel safe going to a football game or a rally or whatever. I surely hope that the conventions get through unscathed. It's a very worrisome thing to think that just one guy with a truck can create this kind of havoc.
Yeah, and of course, ultimately, you can't have any kind of prosperity without the layer of peace beneath it, that's for sure, whether it's around the world or in America. Thank you both. Thank all three of you very much. Before we go, Steve, you wanted to say something here. We know at least Hillary Clinton is calling them radical Islamic terrorism, something that Obama doesn't do. But I think she is going to have to say something.
And I would hope, and I know it may be dreaming, that she, at this point, maybe it would be nice to stand side by side with Donald Trump at this point in time and say, look, regardless of our politics, we're in it together. Our responsibility is to protect the American people.
Maybe, who knows, post conventions for both of them. We know this is a sad day for the Western world, an extraordinarily sad day for France, which keeps taking these kind of hits. Again, remember, 60 are dead, hundreds are injured in a truck attack in Nice, France. Lou Dobbs is next. He's got a special coverage on this. It's going to take you, in fact, all the way to 9 p.m., so keep it right here on Fox Business.